I grew up in what I thought was a religious home. We went to yeshiva, we went to an Orthodox synagogue. It wasn't until I was 35 years of age that I made a discovery. I was always curious what it was like for my father growing up in Germany. And one day he described to me that he was walking to shul on Shabbos. He was 11 years old, and on the way, a friend of his met him, and his friend said to him, "Why don't you come with me to the museum?" And my father said to me that Shabbos, instead of going to shul, he went to the museum. And I said to him, "Dad, what did your father say when you didn't show up in shul?" He looked at me and said, "You knew my father wasn't religious, but I didn't." You see, we were brought up without that little fact. My father had learned the ways of our Torah, adopted them and kept them. My grandmother wanted him to have a Jewish education. She would take him every day by trolley to a Jewish school, and he began learning and began keeping the ways of the Torah. I was so moved by the fortitude. This was Germany in the 20s and the 30s, the height of assimilation. No one was returning to Judaism. I was so moved by the fortitude, the strength, that I told the story over in public at a shmooze, and my father was at that shmooze. And I said that my father was 11 years old when he became a Baal Tshuva. My father was a very humble man, but he came over to me after and said, "It's not true. I was not 11. I remember clearly when I was 6 years old, I was on the floor Shabbos playing with toys in a way that not to violate Shabbos." He never was a Baal Tshuva because from the moment he heard the message, he kept to it.
My brother and I recently sat Shiva for our father. And sitting Shiva is a remarkable experience in which you get to tell about the person, but also the interesting factor that we discovered is that people get to tell you a lot of how that person interacted with them. And one word that was consistently used by the people who came to be Menachem Avel is that my father was a gentleman. He always was a gentleman, and that's how he came across. I'll tell you an interesting story, or at least I found it interesting. That happened to me one of the trips I went to in Florida. I wasn't going to rent a car because it would take too long to get to the hospital to visit my father, so I arranged that a car service that regularly picks people up from Deerfield Beach, where my father lives, would pick me up at the airport and take me to the hospital where my father was. And the cab driver, the non-Jewish cab driver, picked me up, and I told him we're going to Boca Regional Hospital, and he said, "Who you're seeing?" And I said, "Edwin Shafier." He said, "Edwin Shafier? I knew him. He was such a nice man." This is the non-Jewish cab driver and his reaction. Everyone who came across my father always thought that my father was a gentleman, and that's who he was.
When we were little, if we would lose a tooth, we would come to Grandma, and we would show her the tooth, and she would give us $1, and she would say, "Shh, don't tell your grandfather I gave you already." And we would go running off to Grandpa, and we would show him the tooth, and he would give us $1 too. And we thought this was so funny, and it's our secret with Grandma, until when Grandma died, Grandpa started giving us $2 per tooth, and we realized that he knew all along, but that's just how he was. He was quiet and generous, giving, and always so dignified. He walked into a room and you pulled yourself up straight because that's what you do. That's the proper way to act. During the Shiva, there was we got a call from the Gabbai in the shul in Deerfield Beach where he had lived for 14 years, and the Gabbai said that every time he got a Misha Beirach or an Aliyah, he gave a donation. Who does that? Most people do not do that, but that was the proper thing to do, and he did it. And when he would come to Monsey, when he went to Teaneck, anywhere he would go, every single time he would give a donation because that's the right thing to do.
When Jews came over from Poland, from Russia, they came to these shores and there was nothing for them. There were no educational programs, no kiruv programs. The assimilation was rampant, and by and large, we lost huge segments of our people. Chazaq, as an organization, is trying to make sure that that doesn't happen again. If you see the amount of classes, outreach, the amount of programs that they're running, it's an astonishing thing. I believe this evening's award is very appropriate to go in memory of my father, because he was a man who changed his own world, who changed his life. He saw the words of truth. Chazaq is trying to bring that message to a much wider swath of a Jewish people. May Hashem grant them much success and bracha in all that they do.